Let's go all the way back. Okay.
Back to where?
Back to 5A4. The last line on Daf Hey Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Loza, Amar Rabbi Chanina. This is where we start with the story that was told about Rebbe planting a tree on Purim. Okay. Okay.
584. Oh, 584. Okay, thank you.
Okay, you got it? Okay. Let's see what time is. Yeah, we can start. Okay. First of all, I just want to make an announcement that unfortunately tomorrow and on Sunday, I personally will not be giving the shir because I'm traveling with my son to Toronto to take him back to yeshiva. We've been waiting since Pesach to get his passport back, and he still hasn't gotten his passport back. And it's ridiculous that he's been out of yeshiva for so long. So we're taking his birth certificate, and hopefully with Hashem's help, he'll be able to cross the border. We're flying to Buffalo, then driving him through. And I'm doing it together because I was asked to come and speak, to be a speaker at a Shabbaton, and they were willing to cover my expenses. So I'm like, once they're willing to cover my expenses, come to a Shabbaton in Canada, I might as well take my son over, just instead of flying straight there, fly to Buffalo and then drive him across. This way he'll get back to yeshiva instead of ridiculously waiting with no end in sight to get his passport. So that's why I'm not going to be able to give the class tomorrow or on Sunday, but my understanding from Rabbi Smith is that he will take over the class for Friday and Sunday. Okay. So let's start again from Daf Hey Amud Aleph at the bottom of the page, last line. Excuse me. Amar Rabbi Loza, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Loza says in the name of Rabbi Chanina that Rebbe, he had heard that Rebbe Nota Natiya b'Purim, Rebbe planted a shoot on Purim, which seems to be out of line with what we understand about what's permitted and what's not permitted on Purim. Verochatz b'kreina shel Tzipori b'shiva asa b'Tammuz, and he bathed on the market day of Tzipori on the 17th day of Tammuz, which Kreina has different interpretations. Some people say that this refers to the carriages. So it's a time when the carriages would pass by the marketplace, and in this public place, he would go to a place where everybody understood that he was going to bathe there, and he did so on Shiva Asa B'Tammuz to make a point. Ubikish la'akar Tisha B'Av, and he sought to abolish Tisha B'Av, and as Tosfos points out, not that he sought to abolish Tisha B'Av altogether, but it seems that when Tisha B'Av was established as a fast, it wasn't established with all the stringencies that we practice today. That is only something that came a little bit later on, not in the initial stages of when they began to fast on Tisha B'Av. But Tosfos points out that it's obvious that he would not have wanted to completely uproot the fast of Tisha B'Av. We know that somebody who doesn't fast on Tisha B'Av won't be zeicha to see the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. So that wasn't the case. Tosfos gives another interesting alternative, and he says that perhaps what this could mean is that we know that Tisha B'Av, the original Tisha B'Av, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it started on the 9th of Av, but the Beis Hamikdash continued to burn on the 10th of Av. And since that was the case, so it seems that Rebbe was of the opinion that perhaps the day should be moved, not to be the 9th of Av, but should be the 10th of Av. That's the day when we should practice the fast of Tisha B'Av. But the rabbis did not agree with him. So now, after having stated this particular teaching, right, Rabbi Loza saying in the name of Rabbi Chanina, so Rav Abba Bazavda presents a clarification. Omar lefanav Rabbi Abba Bazavda. Rabbi Bazavda said in front of Rabbi Loza, Rabbi Lekachoya Maisa, that was not the case with Rebbe. That's not the story that happened. Rather, what was the real story? The real story was Tisha B'Av Shecholi Yes B'Shabbos Haba. It was the year when Tisha B'Av fell on Shabbos. And since it fell on Shabbos and we don't fast on Shabbos, the only time that we fast on Shabbos is on Yom Kippur. Although the truth is, this is not very well known, but I guess known by people who know, that there's another time when if a fast falls out on Shabbos, we wouldn't postpone it.
Asar B'Tevis.
Very good. Asar B'Tevis. Why is Asar B'Tevis? Because it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. And so since Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh is something that is also referenced with regards to Yom Kippur, so therefore we learn from this that we don't that we wouldn't push off Asar B'Tevis if it fell out on Shabbos. Now, although Asar B'Tevis can fall out on Friday, and it has, and we fast on Friday all the way to Shabbos. However, what happens is because of our fixed calendar, we never have it falling out on Shabbos. But what we're saying is that since it fell out on Shabbos that year, Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos, and it was postponed. So he said, it was postponed till after Shabbos. And Rebbe said, since it's already postponed from its regular day, let it be postponed altogether. In other words, let's not observe it this year altogether. But the rabbis, the other sages, did not agree with him. Now, when Rebbe Loza, the name of when Rebbe Loza heard this clarification, Kari Alei, he said upon this on to Rebbe Abba Bazavta, he says that when it says in the verse two are better than one, this is exhibit A of the benefits of learning together with others, because they can correct you when you have a faulty understanding or recollection of what took place. Okay. So now, but going back to the actual issue for which we brought this, which taught us that Rebbe planted something on Purim. Rebbe Heichi not out Purim. How could Rebbe plant a shoot on Purim? What's the question? Because Rebbe Yosef, did Rebbe Yosef teach us a brisa? It says with regards to Purim, Simcha u'mishte v'yom tov, that the day of Purim was to be established as a day of Simcha, gladness, Mishte, of feasting, v'yom tov and a Yom Tov, and in the Brisa it clarifies what each verse comes to teach me. Simcha malamid shasur behesped. The gladness comes to teach me that it's forbidden to eulogize. Mishte malamid shasur b'tainis, that feasting teaches me that it's forbidden to fast on Purim, which is an interesting thing. I mean, seemingly, if it says Mishnah, why wouldn't I say that it's coming to teach me that I'm supposed to have a Mishnah? And this is the reason why some people feel that it's not necessarily an obligation to wash for a Su'udah on Purim. Because over here in the Brisa, it says that Mishnah comes to teach me that it's forbidden to fast. So therefore, there's no place then that tells me that I'm obligated to wash and eat bread. What's going to be the nafka mina? What's going to be the difference la halacha? The difference la halacha is going to be is what happens if in benching I forget to say v'alanisim. So if you're obligated to wash and eat bread and you forget v'alanisim, then you for sure have to go back and you have to say v'alanisim. But if you're not obligated, then perhaps you don't. And I think the halacha taka is that if you did not say valanisim by the Suda of Purim, you don't go back, because according to this, there's no obligation for you to actually wash and eat. The only obligation over here is that it's forbidden to have a fast. But we have one more word, and that is v'yamtiv. Says Rabbi Yosef from the Brisa, he says that Melamid also is melacha. From the word yamtiv, this teaches me that it's like yamtiv in that work is forbidden. If that's the case, how could Rabbi Yosef plant a shoot on Purim? Says the Gemara, Ella, rather, got to say that Rabbi Bar Abar Sehava, Rabbi lived in an unwalled city, and therefore he observed Purim when? On the 14th. When he planted this shoot that you're recalling, this was not on the 14th, but he planted on the 15th. And so therefore it wasn't Purim itself. Frank, the Gemara, is this indeed true that he lived in an unwalled city and therefore he would have celebrated on the 14th? How could that be? Well, Rabbi lived where he lived in Tiberia. Now, it seems that Rabbi lived in different places at different times, but this particular story took place at a time when he lived in Tveria, according to Tosfos, and he says with regards to Tveria, Mukefes Chema, Mimeish Yeshua Nun Havya, and Tveria was a city that was surrounded by a wall already in the time of Rabbi Shua ben Nun, and therefore the day of Purim would be on the 15th, and that's how he was able to. That's the question of the Gemara. That's the question of the Gemara. So how can you tell me that he planted on the 15th and it was okay because he was living in an unwalled city? He was living in Tiberia, and therefore Purim would have been 15. And if you're telling me that he planted on the 15th, it's a problem. From the Brisa, where we see it's also to do any malacha. Or rather, what do we have to say? That maybe it was the other way around. Rabbi Bar Chamesa Hava, that indeed he lived in Tiberia, and therefore the day he has to celebrate is on the 15th. And Mechinota, when he planted Barba Selva, it was actually on the 14th and not on the 15th. So therefore, that wouldn't be a problem. Now, going back to the fact that we've just stated that he lived in Tiberia and therefore he celebrated on the 15th, the Gemara asks him, is it really that simple to him? Is it really that obvious to him that Tiberia was surrounded by a wall since the time of Yeshua ben Nun? We have someone who lived many years before him, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, and he read the Megillah, we're told, on the 14th and the 15th. Why? Because he was in doubt. Whether it was indeed surrounded by a wall in the time of Yeshua ben Nun or not. And that's why he read them both. So how could Rabbi read it on the 15th and not celebrate the 14th? So the Gemara answers that, sorry, Lechizkiya Masabkale. The Chizkiya, it was indeed a question. But Rabbi Pshitale, but according to Rabbi, he had no doubt about this. He was sure that it was classified a walled city. Now we're going to see soon in the Gemara what was the question that Chizkiyahu HaMelech had. But be that as it may, Rebbe did not have the same question, and for him it was obvious that he was going to read on the 15th. Now, if it was so obvious to Rebbe that it was the 15th, and therefore he planted it on the 14th, the question still remains, Mishari, who says that it's actually permitted, even though you're not celebrating the 14th, but who says you're allowed to do malach on the 14th, even if you're in a walled city? What's the question? Because it's written in Megillah's Tainis, that both the 14th day and the 15th day, they are the days of Purim, the Lemispan Bahoin, which you're not allowed to do any eulogy on them. Now, here's the thing. If you're not allowed to do any mispaid on these days, then seemingly you're not allowed to do any malacha on these days either, as we've taught from the Brisa of Rabbi Yosef. And furthermore, Rava comes and tells us this was not necessary to write in the Megillah Tainis the only reason why the Megillah's Tainis had to restate this fact that you're not allowed to do a hesped on the 14th and the 15th is not to tell me that these days are Purim. That I already know from the Megillah, but it's to tell me that on the day of the walled cities celebrating, the unwalled cities are also not allowed to do any hesped, and vice versa. Both ways, for these 2 days, all locales are not allowed to do any malacha. Well, at least in Megillah's Tainis, it says you're not allowed to do any hesped on these days, right? But the Gemara's understanding of this at the moment is that would seemingly also include not doing any malacha on either of those days. So we're back to the question, how could Rebbe plant a shoot, even if it wasn't on the day of his celebrating Purim, it was still on a day that was considered to be Purim. So the Gemara answers, Hani Mili, behesed of Tainus. That which you quoted from Megillah's Tainus, that one's not allowed to do any hesped on, and they're not allowed to fast on both days, the 14th and the 15th. That's only with regards to these two things of eulogies and with fasting. Avo malacha, but with regards to malacha, yoim echad v'su loy, work is forbidden only one day and no more. So the fact that the Megillah's Tainus leaves out this idea of both days being forbidden in work, and yet it mentions Tainus and hesped, it's actually precise. It wasn't an accident that they left it out. It's for when it comes to malacha, it's a separate category, and that's going to only be forbidden on the day of Purim itself. Frag the Gemara, Eini, is this so? Rav Chaziel lahu gavra shadik kista b'puraya. Rav saw a man who was sowing flax on Purim. V'latye, and Rav cursed him. V'loy tomech kisnei, and his flax did not grow. So the Mefarshim say a few things over here that I wanted to bring up, to follow on from our discussion yesterday. Number one, just to clarify, it's not the person that was cursed. He just said that there should be no siman bracha from the flax that he actually planted. And indeed, it didn't grow. But it's not that he himself was cursed. And the next thing is we're going to discuss in a moment why he was cursed. Why curse a guy just because he did a malacha which on Purim? Now, seemingly, the Gemara is asking a question which doesn't seem to be a difficulty altogether, because the answer from the Gemara should have been obvious to begin with. The answer the Gemara says that Hossam, the Gemara answers Hossam bar Yemahava. It was the actual day of Purim that the person was observing that he planted the flax. So we want to try and understand for a minute, what is the question of the Gemara? The Gemara came along and said that Rebbe planted a shoot. He shouldn't have planted a shoot if it was Purim. We said it's not Purim because he celebrates a different day. We asked the question, but what about the fact that it says Megillah's Tainus that it's both days that you need to keep, this irrespective of where you're living, you need to keep both days. We answered that's only with regards to eulogies and fasting. And we come back now with a challenge saying, what about this story where this guy was planting flax? It seems like the question is, and it wasn't Purim for him. So therefore, that would be a challenge to what we said. But from the answer of the Gemara, it seems that this would have been obvious, right? That the reason why Rav cursed this person was because it was on the day of Purim itself. So I don't really have the answer. I just know that it is discussed by the Ritva. I didn't have a chance to actually look up the Ritva. I've been very preoccupied, and also it seems that the Chassam Sofer and the Sfas Emes have answers to what the Gemara is trying to say over here. But we respond to the challenge by saying that, look, it was the same day, and therefore you cannot compare it to the story that happened with Rebbe, where it was a different day. Okay.
Rabbi,
yes.
I'm sorry, I don't see the part about the curse.
So it's on 5b2, just after we said 5 on the left-hand column, the Gemara says, Eini, is it so that work is forbidden only one day and permitted the other day?
Eini Mile?
Eini, you see it? Eini?
Just Eini, or is it Eini Mile?
No, Eini. It's on 5b2.
Yeah, I'm looking on the left, but on top.
It's the third paragraph.
The what?
Third paragraph.
Third paragraph. 1, 2, 3.
Aini.
I
The
don't
Gemara
see.
questions this. You see, it says the Gemara questions this. Aini.
I don't see that by me.
Just after the Hanimili, you saw the Hanimili. The next paragraph.
Oh, Amy, is
Yes.
it so?
Yes.
Is that,
So then it continues. Rav saw a man who was sowing flax on Purim, and he cursed him for working on Purim.
which word is used for cursing?
Laite.
How?
Laite. It says the
Later, okay.
The Rav Chizkiah lehahu gavra dehava kashadai bitna.
Kitna Bapuraya. And then the next word.
Bitna, I don't see the next word. Bepuraya.
That's
Yeah.
Purim.
Yeah. And the next word. What's the next word?
After Puraya,
Yeah.
Velo,
Velatie.
oh, Velatia, okay.
And he cursed him.
So Velatia is
Is it
curse?
cursed? Yep.
Okay, I didn't know.
No problem. It's not Hebrew, it's Aramaic. All
Okay.
right. So we answered that. It's not a problem because that was the same day. And that's why, and that's why he was cursed. Now, 1 second. We're gonna come back to this in a few moments. But let's just offer a different reason for a moment why it was permissible for Rebbe to plant a plant. Rabba the son of Rabba said, you can even say that Rabba planted it on the same day, on the 15th itself. Why? Because your whole premise for asking how could Rebbe plant a shoot is because you're assuming that it was indeed established that we cannot do malacha on Purim. However, according to the answer we're going to give now, we'll see that malacha wasn't actually forbidden on Purim. Hesped, the Tainus, Kibdu Alayu, although initially they tried to establish both prohibiting eulogies and fasting and working, it's only the eulogizing and the fasting that everybody accepted upon themselves as restrictions. However, malacha like kabilu alayim, they did not accept upon themselves the prohibition of doing any work. That they didn't accept upon themselves, which is why everybody drives to shul on Purim, right? Because it's not also been malacha, it's not really made into a yom tiv like all other yom tovim. So therefore, that being the case, planting a shoot would not be a prohibition if the Jewish people did not accept upon them this upon themselves. But 1 second, we have a little bit of a question, and that is, we just brought down a brisa from Rabbi Yosef, who brought a pasuk from the Megillah, where the Megillah came along and says that they were going to establish it as Yemei, Simcha, Mishta, and Yom Tov. So what happened to that pasuk? So he says, this is what happens. The Mikariksiv in the beginning, when it says in the pasuk Simcha or Mishta or Yom Tov, that was initially before the Jewish people accepted to establish Purim for forever. They initially wanted to establish it as days of Simcha and Mishta and Yom Tov, but all of a sudden, at the end, after Purim had been accepted, what does it say in the pasuk? It says last is Osam, to make them Yemei Mishta, days of feast, the Simcha and joy and gladness. But the Ilu Yom Tov, the word Yom Tov, that like it doesn't say, and that's because the Jewish people didn't accept upon themselves to withhold from doing any work on Purim. If that's the case, comes back to the Gemara with the question, Ve'ela Rav, if that's the case, the story that you brought with Rav, that he cursed the guy, my time lahu gavra, why did you curse the guy who's sowing this flax. What did he do wrong? You're telling me now that Rebbe was okay because there was no Iyar to do malacha. Yes, initially they said they wanted it, but ultimately it was not accepted, and that's why people could do malachas. And then, if that's the case, why did Rav curse the guy who was planting flax? Says the Gemara, Dvarim hamutarim, because it's a case of things that are essentially permitted. It's become it's that some people, meaning the people of that city, treat them as forbidden. And if a custom has been established in a particular city, right? So then somebody to come along and do work going against the custom in front of the other people of the city, then that person is doing the wrong thing, and that's why he was cursed. And that's why he was cursed. And this is actually something that was that's brought down in Maseches Psachim, right? In Maseches Psachim, this is what it says: that when somebody I'm going to bring that over here. It says over here in Psachim Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, and also it's brought down in the Dorim, the Daf Tesvav Amud Aleph, that somebody who does malacha in a place where they establish the custom not to do malacha. This is talking about on Erev Yom Tif, right? Then over Mishum Bal Titosh Teras Imecha, that he's being over because of Al Titosh Teras Imecha, and that's why he. That's why he cursed him. That's why he cursed him.
Rabbi, this is the reason why I asked the question.
Right.
So if an individual did not get this, when I say Lokitush Torati Mecha, okay, this is not a Kabbalah that he received. You know, you're saying I'm being forced to do something, and if I'm in someone else's, but it goes against everything that I was taught.
Right. I think I'm going off memory. I had a very hectic day yesterday, and I apologize.
And I know you and I had this discussion yesterday.
Yeah, no. But what I'm saying is, I wanted to look it up afterwards, and just like everything got spiraled out of control yesterday.
I'm sure you had things.
No, but I'll tell you what from memory what comes to mind. There's an issue of machloket. I think that's the issue. If I'm not mistaken, the issue is machloket, that when we're going to have a city where different people are following different customs, and certain people take things on as a particular stringency, and it seems that it would have to be the majority of the city take this on as a stringency, then for somebody to go out and befarhesia, like be a thorn in somebody else's eye, that is considered to be a bad thing. I think that's the reasoning behind why he cursed him, and why in general there's this idea that somebody who does work on a day when people have the custom not to, he's not going to see any simon bracha from that work forever. It's because of the machlekes that comes as a result of it, not so much because of whether he did or didn't work. It's a matter of being the source of other people's anguish and frustration when they see him doing malacha. I think so. I have to find the actual source for it. I know there's a Gemara that deals with it, but I can't remember whether it's from the Gemara that I quoted from Psachim or somewhere else. I think it is in the Psachim, but I didn't have a chance to really look up the Psachim. I'm relying on the Mesivta Shas that brought up that Gemara.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we're making an assumption here that this individual who did the planting had been living in this area for a long time, and so therefore
yes.
he knew. Therefore, he knew what the minhagim of the place was.
Correct.
And that's the reason why he, Rebbe cursed.
He cursed the flax. he cursed that. He cursed that he shouldn't see a simon bracha from the flax that he was planting, just like we say on Erev Yom Tif when the minhag of the community is that people don't work. Then somebody who does work, we say ein roya simon bracha from the work that he does on that day. That's what. That's the way. Yeah.
Because in general, I mean, in a situation like this, it's a teaching moment for Rebbe to this individual. If he was new to the area, etc., he would say, "Listen, perhaps this is what you did but here, this is what we do." And
right.
Okay, but that's not what it said. So there are a lot of things that are missing here. That's the reason why I reacted the way that I did.
Yeah, which is fair enough, and I understand that there are a lot of details missing from the story over here. We just brought it in just to question this statement of the Gemara about Rebbe. But you're right. I mean, it would be. I would like to find out more about the story. I just didn't have a chance, but I hope to look into it more.
Rabbi,
yes.
Did he actually plant a plant in the garden? Is that what they're talking about?
Yeah, he planted a tree. Yes.
Okay. And he planted it for happiness, is what it says.
Oh, we're coming there. We're coming to that.
Okay.
You're too far forward.
We're coming there. That's all right. So now the e-base right? 1 second. So it was so we said that it was a Dvarim Hamutarim Ma'acherim Nagu Behen Isa Hava, that the case of Rav was that although it's essentially permitted, but some treated them as forbidden, and that was the case in Rav's city. So therefore, since in the place where Rav lived, the custom was to abstain from work, so Rav cursed the man for violating the custom. But the Rabbi, but in the place of Rabbi, it was not the practice to abstain from work on Purim. And so therefore, he was permitted to plant on Purim. So now we're coming to what you just said, that if you prefer. There's another reason why it may have been permissible for Rebbe. No, that really Rebbe, even in his place, they had the practice to not do any malacha on Purim. But Rebbe, the Tia Shel Simcha Nata, Rebbe planted for the purpose of Simcha, for joy, Kidatnan. Like we learned in a Mishnah, that there's a concept of planting for the purposes of joy, where in the tractate of Tainus, where it talks about fasts for when the rain has not fallen, Avru Elu, if all these fasts have passed, and they were not yet answered with rain, then they take extra measures to do for tshuva. By what? By mamatin. The masa matan, they engage less in business, in commerce, bebinya, in construction, ubenitia, and in planting, the erusin, in betrothals, ubenisuin, and with marriages. All these things they do less of. They restrict themselves when it comes to a sarah, a time of affliction when people are not having rain for their fields. That's what they would do. So now, Tana taught in a brisa regarding this Mishnah. What is this binyan shel simcha? When it says a binyan in the Mishnah and Tainus that they didn't do any construction, this is referring specifically to a binyan of joy, construction of joy. The tia, when it says in the Mishnah that they do not do, they restricted the planting. It's the tia shel simcha, was a planting for the purpose of joy. Now, what's considered to be an example of a construction for the purpose of joy? This is somebody who builds a wedding residence for his son, where they not only the son would live, but that's where they would have the wedding. So this is something that they would restrict if rain had not yet fallen. Now, Ezo Natia Simcha says, continuing the brisa, what was an example of planting for the purposes of joy? Zanatea Avorniki Shamalachim. This is one who plants a special tree that was something that was created for people of higher status. They had a special shade and a special kind of shape to it, and as a result, it was a very special tree that brought joy. And so that's what's considered to be an Atir Shel Simcha. And that's the end of That's the end of that shtickle with regards to him actually planting a shoot on Purim. We say he did it on the day that wasn't the day that he was celebrating, but nevertheless, it was one of the 2 days. It was the 14th. But now coming back to what we mentioned before we said that there was a difference between Rebbe and Chizkiah. Chizkiah seems to have a doubt whether Tiberia was considered to be a walled city from the time of Rishon ben Nun, and Rebbe doesn't seem to have any problem with it. So, Gufa, let's go back to the text that we mentioned earlier. Chizkiah, Karei, B'Tiberia, Barbasei, V'Chameshesei. Rebbe read the Megillah on the 14th and the 15th. Why did he read on the 14th and the 15th? He had a doubt whether it was surrounded by a wall in the days of Rishon ben Nun or not. So why did he read it both days? I mean, seemingly, reading the Megillah is the Rabbanan. And when you have a suffix the Rabbanan, it's actually supposed to be to a more lenient side. It's l'kula, not l'chumra. So why did he read on both days? So the Mefarshim say that, number one, you couldn't have a complete leniency, because if you have a complete leniency, then you don't end up reading it at all. Because in the 15th you say, yeah, but it's a suffix. It could be the 15th. It could be the 14th, because it could be that this is not a walled city, and so therefore I'm not going to read today. And then on the 14th you can say, yeah, but it's a doubt, because it could be that it is a walled city, and suffix the Rabbanan is l'kula, and then you end up not reading at all, and that's definitely not an option. You have to read. So therefore, he had to read on one of them. But the Mefarshim say that the truth is he could have read on the 14th, because that would have been together with what the Rav Am Yisrael do, and then you go together with the Rav and read on the 14th. The reason why he read on the 15th was just Milsa de Chasidusa. It wasn't actually an obligation. But the question is, why did he do that? Although it was a Milsa de Chasidusa, maybe he wasn't obligated to read on both days. But why did he read on both days? He says because he wasn't sure whether it was surrounded by a wall in the times of Reb Shimon ben Nun. So now the Gemara asks a question on the doubt of Chizkiah. What do you mean? Milsa de Tiberia. Could Chizkiah really have a doubt with regards to the status of Tiberia, whether it was walled or not? It was already says in the pasuk in Yeshua. It says Va'ore Mivtza, the fortified cities, meaning the cities that had walls around them. Hatzidim, yeah. It's Tzidim, Tser, V'chamas, Rakas, V'chineres. So we see over here, all these cities were considered to be fortified, meaning they had walls. V'kaimalon, Rakas, Zutferia. And we've established that when it says in the book of Yeshua, Rakas, it refers to Tveria. So therefore, what is the doubt of Chizkiah? So says the Gemara, it was for this reason that Chizkiah had a doubt. What is that? That although it was surrounded by a wall, but one side of it was actually on the water. And since it was on the water, it didn't have a wall. And since it didn't have a wall, so he's not sure whether this is going to be classified as a wall in terms of reading the Megillah. Now, if that's so, meaning one side was enclosed by water, amay mesapkele. So what's the question? It's certainly not a wall, and so therefore, if it's not a wall, what's your question? Just consider it to be like the unwalled cities, and therefore it's going to be on the 14th. What's your question? The Tanya, as it's taught in the Brisa, and here we go to the laws that with regards to selling land, selling houses in a walled city, right? About the whole idea of being able to redeem it. It says over there, which has a wall. And this implies that it's a real wall. The Brisa tells us that from the fact that it says that it has a real wall, it teaches me, the implication is the loishur igar, and not a wall of houses. Meaning to say, if you don't have an actual wall around the city, but you have, let's say, a bunch of houses that are all attached together, serving as a row, and you're using that as the wall of the city, that's not considered to be a city that is surrounded by a wall, and therefore the laws with regards to redeeming it, the special laws of the houses that are in walled cities would not apply to such a city that they're using the houses as a wall itself. And and the next verse, when it says Saviv, we continue in the Brisa, when the pasuk says that it's surrounding Prat Tiberia Sheyama Chemasa. The Brisa tells us with regards to which cities are considered to be cities that you can redeem the house if you sell it, right? Only up to a year. This excludes Tiberia. Why? Because there's a word in the pasuk which says Saviv, and in Tiberia the wall didn't go Saviv, didn't go all the way around. Why? Because the water of the Kineres, that is its wall, and therefore, if that's the case, it's clear from this brisa that it's not going to be considered a walled city, and so therefore, why did Chizkiah even have a question? He should have just read it on the 14th. And for the Gemara, with regards to the law about houses in a walled city, whether you can redeem it or not, that wasn't his question. Of course, he knew this, the teaching that the Brisa taught later on, but he knew this already earlier. This teaching, that the limud that we have, that from the words Asher Lechema and the word Saviv, it excludes Tiberia. So therefore, that wasn't his question. But his question was Le'inyan Mikra Megillah. He was Kima Sapkalon. When, in which case was he in doubt? Le'inyan Mikra Megillah, with regards to the reading of the Megillah. Why was he in doubt? Because you have to understand, in the Megillah, it doesn't use the words walled city or unwalled city. It doesn't say that. All it says is Arei HaProzim. And what does that mean? So he says, so his question was, my prozim or my mukafin, what's the definition of unwalled places? And what's the definition of the opposite of prozim, which we understand to be as mukafin, surrounded? Not that that word appears in the Megillah, but we understand to be the opposite of prozim means mukafin, surrounded. So we want to know, what is the criteria? What is the definition? The Chsive Gabe Mikra Megillah, which is written with regards to the Megillah. With regards to reading the Megillah, it says Araya Prasim, and that is the unwalled cities that read on the 14th. We just want to know what's what in terms of how do you define it. Why? The Mishum Dahane Miglo. Do we say that the distinction between walled cities and unwalled cities, what's called a prozim and what's called mukafin, is that this one is revealed, miglu, and the other ones are not revealed. In which case, it's very clear that Tiberia would be one of those who are revealed, right? Because it has a side, the side of the Kinneret, which is not closed off, which means it's revealed, and therefore you'd read it on the 14th. And so therefore we would say that Tiberia is also exposed because it lacks a wall on the side, and therefore it's going to be considered unwalled, and you read it on the 14th. Idealma, the doubt that Chizkiah had was perhaps we should say Mishum Dahan and Migno, the reason why we're calling these things prozim and these the other ones are not prozim, but rather they're mukafin, is because they are being protected. In other words, they're protected from people who want to come and conquer the city. V'hani le'migno. And these ones are, meaning the Arya Prozim, they're not protected. V'ha nami mignaya. But this one, meaning Tiberia, it is protected. Why? Because it's not so simple to conquer from the water. The water serves as an advantage to make a barrier between you and your enemies who are trying to attack you. And therefore, even though there's no actual wall, but there still is protection from that side, in which case Tiberia is completely protected. And since it's completely protected, maybe it's the 15th. And that's the doubt that, and therefore you would only read on the 15th. And that's the doubt that he had. Which way do we understand it? And it's because of this, he was in doubt over the status of Tiberia. Okay? So now Gemara moves on to talk about other cities, and then we're going to, yes.
So the question was whether we're talking about walled cities for the specific case of protection versus walled cities for the specific case of just having a wall.
Yes.
And so he didn't know whether the idea of walled cities was because of protection or because it was just stam, there's a wall there.
Correct. I mean, and that's just a the definition. Yeah, that's what he wasn't sure of. I mean, this whole discussion over here poses a problem with what we learned earlier, right? Because Rabbi Shimon Levi, right, he derived from the psukim that talk about this law of the houses in walled cities. But nevertheless, it seems that ultimately it doesn't matter one way or the other. We ultimately go with this idea of if it had a wall around it from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, then it was considered to be a city that reads on the 15th. And it seems that Tveria fell into that category, despite it being open on one side, having the water there. All right. Rav Asi Kari Megilla Bohutzal Barbase or Bechameser. Just like we had Chizkiah reading it on the 14th and the 15th, we have Rav Asi reading the Megillah in a place called Hutzal on both the 14th day and the 15th day. Now, there's a discussion as to whether Hutzal was part of Eretz Yisrael or outside of Eretz Yisrael. It seems that if it's outside of Eretz Yisrael, that would be very interesting, because then you'd have a situation where if you have a city outside of Eretz Yisrael that had a wall in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, you'd still read it on the 15th. And you can't ask a question about Shushan, because we already said with regards to Shushan is the place where it had the nest. The nest took place, but outside of Eretz Yisrael, the notion of reading the Megillah on the 15th is really not really heard of, right? It's only the cities in Eretz Yisrael that were walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun that read the Megillah on the 15th. But either way, it seems that many of the Mefarshim therefore feel that no, it must be talking about the Hutzal that's in Eretz Yisrael, and Rav Asi said, and Rav Asi read the Megillah on the 14th and the 15th on that day. Now, what's the reason? Because he had a doubt whether this city was actually, sorry, some people are trying to get in. They were in doubt whether he was in doubt whether this city was walled in the time of Yeshua ben Nun or not. The Gemara presents an alternative version of this previous teaching. Some say Amar of Asi. Rav Asi said, "Hi Hutzal, this Hutzal, the base Binyamin, that is of the house of Binyamin. He was surrounded by a wall in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore they should read the Megillah on the 15th." So now comes along the Gemara to tell us a little bit about a discussion that took place with regards to the names of different cities. Rabbi Yechanan said, Talia, when I was a young boy, Amina Bilsa, I thought I said something. The Sha'ilna Lasavia, which I asked the elders, and it was found as I had said. In other words, I was right. It's always nice when you posit something and you end up being right. So he says, this is what happened to me. Hamas zu Tveria. Rabbi Yechanan said that Hamas, this is Tveria. Hamas. And why was this name called Hamas? Why was it given the nickname Hamas? Al Shum Chamit Tveria, because of the hot springs of Tveria. Then he continued to say, Rakas zu Tzipori. He says that the city that is spoken of in the Pasuk as mentioned as Rakas, that refers to Tzipori. V'lama nikra Shema Nikra Shema Rakas. Why is the name called Rakas? Mishum the Midalia Karaksa the Nahara, because it's elevated, and that is like the bank of a river is elevated compared to the river. Then he goes on to say that Kineres, the city called Kineres, Zuk this is called Gnoisa. Why was it called Kineres? Why is this place Gnoisa called Kineres? The Msike Pera Kikala de Kinera, because its fruits are as sweet as the sound of a harp. So now that's the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Now the reason why we brought up the statement of Rabbi Yochanan is because we mentioned these cities before. However, if you're paying attention, the cities that we mentioned before, we explained that Rakas is not that Hamas was not the name of Tiberia, but rather Rakas was. So Amar Rava says, "Me ika lemad Amar Rakas lav Tiberia." Is there anybody who says that Rakas is not Tiberia? V'ha ki shochem inish hacha. When a great man dies here in Bavel, right? Hassam over there in this place called the Rakas, right? Softe lehochi. This is how they eulogize him. They say, Godolhu b'Sheshach. Great is he in Sheshach. Now, how is Sheshach Bavel? How is Sheshach Bavel? It's with Atbash. If you take the words Sheshach, right? So Atbash basically goes Aleph, turns into a Tov, or Tov turns into an Aleph. A base turns into a Shin, or a Shin turns into a base. And that way you could swap the whole Aleph base. So Sheshach, right, is base, Lamed. That's the way it works. So he says, Godel hu b'Sheshach, great is he in Sheshach, which is Bavel, b'Shem loi b'Rakas, and he has a name in Rakas, and that was talking about in Tiberia. That's how they would eulogize in Tiberia for somebody great who passed away in Bavel. And when the coffin of somebody who died in Bavel is brought to bury him where? In Tiberia, they eulogize him as follows. The lovers of the Jewish people, meaning the remnants, the Jewish people, Yeshvei Rakas, the residents of Rakas. And that's what they were talking about themselves as living in Tiberia, the residents of Rakas. So Vakablu go out and go forth and receive Haruge Oimeg, the slain of the deed, meaning the people who passed away from Bavel. But what we see from this is that it proves that Rakas was clearly known to everybody as Tiberia, and not Tzipori, as Rabbi Yochanan says. Another story that shows this, that Rakas is refers to Tiberia. Kinoch Nafshed Reb Zera, when Reb Zera passed away, and remember, Reb Zera was a guy who left Bavel and went up to Eretz Yisrael. It's an interesting, we're told that he fasted 100 Tanesim in order to be able to forget his learning from Bavel so that he could purify himself to be on the level to learn from Eretz Yisrael. But when he died, Pasach Alei Hahus Avdana, a certain eulogizer began his eulogy about him, and he said, Eretz Shino, Haravi Alodo, the land of Shino, which refers to Bavel, conceived and bore this Reb Zera, Eretz Tzvi, but the land of beauty, the land of the Tzvi, Gidlo Shashuel, has raised up her delights. Oy no la, Amra Rakas, woe unto her, says Rakas. Ki ibda klichem dosa, for precious instruments is lost. And so again, this is another instance where we see Rakas is being used as a reference to Tiberia. So since it seems that Rabbi Yochanan's statement couldn't have been as we have just stated, Ela Amar Rava, so Rava says that what? Rather, it must have been, we have to say like this. Hamas zu Chamegrar. Hamas refers to to a place called Chamegrar. Rakas zu Tveria. Rakas refers to Tveria. Kineres ze Gnoisar, and Kineres is Gnoisar. V'lo menikra shema Rakas. So why then was Tveria called? Why is Tveria called Rakas? Because even the empty ones, even the sinners, are full of mitzvahs like Malay mitzvahs karibin are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate.
Rabbi,
Now, yes?
it seems to me that maybe the problem was that in Bavel, they didn't know Tzipori as well, or other towns, but they knew Tiberia. So anything in the area of Tiberia, they said, oh, he was buried in Tiberia.
No, but we're saying that when we're quoting Rakas and saying it's Tiberia, we're saying that the people of Tiberia themselves would call themselves the people of Rakas. So that would seem to contradict what Rabbi Yechanan was saying, and so that's why Rabbah amended the statement and said that no, that we have to read it differently. That really Hamas was not Tiberia, rather it was Hamas, and it was Rakas that was Tiberia. Okay, and why is it called? Why was Tiberia called Rakas? Because even the Rekonim, even the empty ones, are considered to be full with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah says Rakas Shema. Rakas was really the real name of Tiberia, not that Tiberia was its real name, and it got the nickname Rakas, but rather Rakas was its real name, and Tiberia was only the descriptive name. And why was Rakas called Tiberia? Because it was situated in the center of Eretz Yisrael. And Rava Amar,
because it was situated where?
In the center of Israel.
Okay.
In the center of Israel. Rava Amar, Raka Shema. Its real name is Raka, and Tiberia is only a nickname. Why is its name called Tiberia? Because of its beautiful appearance. Because of that, that's why it's called Tiberia. And we'll stop here. And I wish you in advance all a wonderful Shabbos. And this Shabbos is Shabbos Chazak, and it's Bahar B'chukaisai. It's very special, and we should all be zeichet enjoy Shabbos, and it would be really nice if we could be in the Beis Hamikdash as it ends off in Parshat B'chukaisai. At the end, where it says V'af gam zois v'yesem ersevem le'ma'astim le'ga'altem le'chaloisam la'fe b'risiitam. Hashem's going to ultimately remember us and gather us back in. May we be zeichet to that B'karav Mamash.
Thank you,
Have a
Rabbi.
safe trip, Rabbi.
Thank you. Amen.
תצליח בכל דרכיך.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. All right. All the best.
Amen.